All right, recording has started. And let's see what we have for the agenda. We can be very quick about it. I don't have an agenda, but we can look at the GitHub commit, see if we find any interesting that we want to cover. I know, Jay, you have something that you would like to discuss, so maybe we can start with that.
I have put in draft the last PR on the Elsa Studio. I need to double check some items because I see I have some issue to get my option when it's not a simple list of item, and when it is a select list item to display the drop down correctly. That's why I just put my PR on draft, and I will check some elements. And I think I will change other code on the server side to give to the developer an easy way to configure option provider. My issue was just a camel case element. The item in the dictionary need to be with a minus E and not a capital E. So we can, I think, with other strongly typed object, we can avoid this.
That makes sense.
I work a little bit last week on the variable. The idea is to get in the drop down where we select the provider of when we have an expression. I will show this here. In this drop down, I would like to be able to select a variable option and
exactly.
get a drop down with all the available variables. But what I see is to get the drop down, we have we use an expression. So we work on. I have added a variable expression in a new syntax provider to just display a new item in this list, and then I have seen that all the components derive from expression input. This one, yes. And in the expression input, we check if we need to display the Monaco editor. The input is wrapped, and so with this we will show the select dropdown, the syntax dropdown. And I have some issue. I have tried to add a new component, a variable picker, which already exists. The component variable picker already exists. So I think we don't need to recreate it. And during my development, I have seen that I think I do something wrong. And I think we need to decouple some element to be able to organize the code and select maybe other possibility in this dropdown. For now, this dropdown only display a syntax for coding something. And when we select a variable, it's not for coding something, it's just another UI we want to select.
Yeah, exactly. This is a good point. Right now, it's highly opinionated in terms of it's either a code expression that you can enter or some UI as provided by the UI hint handler. But you're completely right. The actual purpose of the setup is well, it's not the correct setup right now, but what it needs to be is to allow you to swap out the UI dynamically based on whatever module or feature we add to the system. So now you're adding a new feature to allow variable pickers to be leveraged. And as you say, that this does require some decoupling and some refactoring.
And so I'm not very, very strong in UI and component and everything. So I think I will let you start this work, and I will focus on other issue.
Yeah, sure. As a matter of fact, I'm already in the process of refactoring both the studio and the server to allow for dynamically showing not just to dynamically show the languages like C# expressions, JavaScript, Python. Right now it's all hard coded in, but this needs to be refactored so that it's feature driven, so it only shows up if you enable the feature. So that's one part that I'm working on. And then as the next part, I will work on decoupling these components so that you have more flexibility, keeping this scenario in mind that you have. And once that's done, then we can add even more features going forward.
Okay.
Wouldn't this be a use case to use the dynamic component, for example?
Talk to me a little bit more about the dynamic component. I've seen it before, but I'm not familiar with it. I've never used it.
Yeah, so basically it's a placeholder and you just need to pass it the component type and it will render it in that place. So that will help if you want to assign a certain component, for example, choose a certain editor based on the property type. So maybe that could be something that can be used here rather than hard coding or trying to use some conditions to select which component you want to render.
That's interesting, and I'll definitely have a look. But we already have other places in the system where we do render components dynamically, which is not hard coded, which makes me wonder what's the added value of the dynamic component versus what we are doing right now. Maybe there's some room for improvement and simplification by using this component, but yeah, I would have to look into the details. Unless you are familiar with it, Ali, and you can show us an example, and then maybe we can apply it to other patterns that we have employed right now.
Yeah, I have used it a little bit. Maybe in the next session I can show some example. But the concept is basically you just need to define the type. So
okay, so it's a
if you're
placeholder. You provide a type of component you want to render, and this type can be dynamically assigned to that property, and then it will render that thing.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, definitely worth taking a look. Thank you for that tip.
Just you always see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. For about the latest PR, I have recreated the vehicle activity that we have in the sample in the Elsa 2, when we can select the available property of a brand for the vehicle, and one of these item is just a random number. This is just to show each time you click on the activity and the form is rendered in Blazor, there is a call to the API that gets the elements of the option provider, the different items.
That's great. This is what we talked about last week, I think. And yeah, that's really cool. So this enables you to provide fresh values every time the activity is selected.
Yes.
Nice.
There is just one thing: is it's each time the input form is rendered, and it is rendered each time, even when you just move this element. When you just resize, it's render this component, and so it calls new time the API.
Yeah. Okay. So that doesn't have to be a problem unless it happens for every microsecond as you keep dragging. Then it might maybe fire a lot of requests at the server. Do you know if that's happening?
I know. I think it's just when you release.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's good. The call to the API is good. I've changed a little bit the option provider, the I option provider interface and activity to allow passing a context object. Will be useful when we want to create a dependent dropdown, cascading dropdown. So for this, I will need to add some new information in the where is it? Here in the input descriptor. We need to pass more information in this element, in this class, because it's all the elements that characterize a property. The depends on, for example, if we add this, like in Elsa v2, if we add a new attribute depends on another property, we need to add this information in the descriptor of the property and the activity. With this, the designer will know that he has to call a new API depending on the value of other property and get this property to attach in the context of the different call.
That makes sense.
And I think that's so it's just here, and I think it's okay. And what I talked just for just this in the activity property option provider, we need to be careful about this element. We need to call it items with a little e. So I think we need to add some strongly typed element to be sure that the developer will not have any issue.
Yeah, that would probably be better. At the same time, as you can see at the return type, it expects you to return a dictionary of string objects, and it's. Are you suggesting that return type should be refactored into something more strongly typed? And if so, how would you propose the level of flexibility that we have now, where we don't know upfront what other component builders will be creating in terms of UI, in terms of activity property options? Do you have any thoughts on that? If your intent is to replace the dictionary string objects with something else?
I don't know. I know in the UI side, we directly get the item elements. So even if it is a dictionary of string object, we just use the first item, which is the items, the first element of the dictionary, which is name items. For this.
Yeah, exactly. For this instance, that's right. What if there's a scenario where you actually want this provider to provide more than one option, but that would then be consumed by maybe a different component handler on the studio?
I understand, but I think it's just a little bit strange because there is one level. I think this items level is just not necessary. The actual call just need to get the dictionary, the string object. Yes, okay. This is because it's a select list item. Yes, I understand. For me, if we want to use just dictionary of string object, it's like a list of text and value. So
yeah,
maybe
exactly.
we just need to change on the UI side and really use as an object a string object object. Yes, just a dictionary of string object.
So in other words, no change is necessary, or I didn't understand.
I think we can before I look at the existing development in my mind. I see, okay, I need a dictionary of string object. So I have developed. I have just wrote this, and I was thinking, okay, I have a dictionary of string object. So the string BMW, and the object is the value of BMW, and I was thinking the UI just get this dictionary and use as is.
Yeah, and this is of course possible, right? So you could be returning this and then update the client side to handle this structure, and it would work. The rationale behind doing it as a separate item in the dictionary is to also allow for scenarios where there's other UI code that also handles property options of the same activity, the same property, but requires a different set of options. I don't have any actual use cases at this moment, but this setup allows for that flexibility. And if we were to change it in the way that you show here, then it also means that if we ever do run into that scenario, we would have to refactor, well, both the server and the client, because now the client side would have to, instead of directly interpreting the dictionary as if they were the drop-down items, they would then again have to get the list from a specific entry in the dictionary.
Yes, yeah, it's just here. I think we just have to get the dictionary directly and not the item menus which is select list item.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I understand your point. And if you and again, you could do it like this, but now imagine there's there's another UI component that also expects properties provided by the same provider, but for different purposes. So it's a different UI thing for the same property for the same activity. How would you handle that?
The same provider,
same activity, same property, different options that you want to provide.
Same activity, same property.
And to be fair, I don't have an actual example which doesn't help clarifying this level of indirection, for lack of a better word. I do intuit that there might be certain scenarios. When I wrote this code, I had some inkling of a potential scenario. I don't remember the details. For one thing, I think, although I agree that with these magic strings like items, the client side being aware of it and the server side also having to be aware of it makes it initially confusing module developers and when you work on these features. But if we take it away, it is limiting, and for the most cases it wouldn't be an issue. But if there's just this one scenario where you just wish it was more extensible and not done like this, maybe we could find a way around by maybe adding more models, but then it would also be tightly coupled to that particular model. And in this way, at least it is open for extension. Yeah, but there's also a case to be made to say, well, let's start simple. And if we run into such scenarios, we open it at that point.
I think it's the provider and the return object of a provider is coupled with the UI we want to use. For example, a select list item is used because we want to display it as a dropdown. If we want to have maybe a table with a multiple column, I don't know, it's just an idea. The option provider will give back a more complex.
Yeah, assuming that then the client side also needs that information together. It knows about this complex object, and it's all integrated on the client side and the server side in a way that they're server and client side counterparts, and there's no scenario where there's client side UI component that still wants to implement some UI behavior for the server side activity and property, but unrelated to the drop down list in this particular instance.
So,
and I agree. I think for the most, if not all scenarios, that is desirable. But let's put it here on the record. It's being recorded. If we run into a scenario where we want to open it up, I can always point back to this conversation and tell you I told you so. And if it never happens, you'll never get to tell me I told you so, because we'll never know.
Okay, so the idea for now is just to have the information and documentation on to be sure to develop the event provider correctly with the item element.
Well, I'm actually open to the idea of simplifying this thing, and instead of returning a dictionary, maybe just return an object, and then it's up to the client side to understand how to cast or parse the returned value, because it does simplify things for the developer. And if it's for 99% of cases it's easier, then that's what we should optimize for.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not entirely convinced it's gonna go well, but sometimes the best way to figure that out is to just try it and run into it as we go. And if we do, it should be okay to make the necessary changes. But I like as a general guiding principle, simplicity first. We start simple and then we make it more complicated as necessary. So in other words, feel free to clean this up this bit.
Okay, thanks.
If I remember correctly, in Elsa 2, you could provide either a simple list as an options, or you can provide a select list. Is that the same case?
Yes, it's the same.
It's the same case.
Yes, here I use a select list item, and if we look at the content type provider, it's just a list of content type. I just had a some test code here because I want to check that I can access HTTP context accessor when we with the new implementation. And here I have tests that I can convert the context object to a custom object. But yes, the return is just here a simple table in the item object. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. So it's just a matter of figuring out how to do more complex UIs while being easily extensible.
Exactly. Extensibility is key because this is not a closed system, not a closed application. It's extensible and modular. We cannot know upfront what others will build and need. So it's always good to have this in mind, or actually it's very important. But also finding the right balance between ease of use and making and when in doubt, just keep it simple, unless we can predict that it would be a potential disaster or very painful change for users in the future if we do decide that we need to break things up a little bit. Usually when it's just code changes that break users' code, that's not a big problem. We can document that. It's more important to be careful with that sort of decisions when it affects, data structures that are stored in persistence stores.
Yeah.
But that's not the case in this case.
But generally, in many frameworks, the concept is to use like something like a property grid with a property editor attributes, and then if you want to change the editor, you just change the attribute and select a different editor, and then you can let whoever is extending the system to provide their own editors and let them control how they want to visualize the data. So is this something that we can achieve here as well, or it will create an issue?
So with this setup, you can still create that even after the simplification that Jay will propose. The point is that you have custom property providers that you can implement for that you can then assign to your custom activities or their properties, and then on the client side you can handle those properties.
Uh-huh.
But Jay, I don't have it fresh on my mind. Can you see if it's related directly to the UI hints? The bit of code that reads or interprets the properties of or the options of a given property. Is that done directly from the UI hint handler or not?
So
1 second. Yeah, okay, I'm there. Yeah.
So the dropdown in the dropdown and the checklist component.
Yeah.
Here,
oh yeah. Okay.
We are looking for the item.
Yeah. So it's actually those components that expect certain properties, certain settings to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you just look at that, imagine you have another component like another UI hint that a user chose, but maybe no, then they would also provide specific properties for that UI hint handler provides. I thought of a scenario where the flexibility of the dictionary would come into play, but that's not necessarily the case either. So
yes, because yes, if we develop a custom UI hint, when we initialize the custom component, we get the element, and we know how to interpret and understand the iDictionary of string object.
Yeah, you're right.
So it's just necessary for me to get only the iDictionary of string object and not a new level of items for the dropdown.
And by the way, maybe not as just don't return a dictionary of string objects, because what if you want items that may not have unique keys, but maybe there should be the option of duplicate items for whatever reason. I don't think it's using a dictionary is suitable for dropdown. So maybe better to just return object instead of dictionary string object. And then what you return is as an actual value is a list of select list items.
Yes, so maybe I don't understand, because when you say in dropdown, it could be useful to have a dictionary, Because
actually no. So the dictionary is, I think it's not useful for a select list.
Okay, and but it's not used because we get the item of the dictionary, the item keys, and
but
then we use the object.
I understand, but after your refactoring, after your simplification, what you return is directly a list of select list items. So that means that in your on your screen on line 19, the script set that options is your list of select list items.
So the idea is to change iDictionary change object directly to an object.
Exactly. If you think it makes sense.
Yeah. Because on the server side, we just need to get the information about what we can have. So just an array or a list of selected list item, and we don't need this one.
Or if you go back to your previous document,
yes,
there's another thing. So if you look at line 44 and together with line 39, notice that from these options, it's trying to select items or provider. Is that your code or is that?
No, it's not mine. It's not mine. Oh, I think it's not my code, and I don't know. I think it's it's
scaffold
just
code.
Yes, it's a code from Elsa 2 maybe, but don't know why.
It might have been me actually, where I added. If you look at the to-do statement, the idea was for depending on what value there is in the select list options object, to either just deserialize as is done on line 41 or invoke some API call.
It items are okay, and with my change, the remote provider is already is always
Exactly. This is actually something you may want to consider as well, because right now it's always calling the remote API, even when we can know upfront that it will never change those values. Because in some cases we just provide a static list of items and then it's unnecessary to make API call. It does simplify the implementation, but maybe we can.
And I think maybe, but it asks me a change in the descriptor. So first, in my first iteration, I just want to be sure that I can expose the endpoint to get the provider, etc., etc. And we discussed last week about some new property to avoid refreshing constantly, and maybe in the descriptor, so in an attribute of the property, we can say use a static or refresh property true or something else, and here just have this kind of property.
Yeah, I like that, because in your setup, it's more flexible. It's not just about drop downs. It could be any kinds of options that could change for whatever reason on the server. And then with this setting, you can control to always get updated options.
And so we can imagine this slide. Say refresh provider false or is static or something like that.
Yeah, that's nice.
I'm not really good at wording, but I will try to think about.
That's very clear.
It's clear.
Oh yeah, naming.
Yeah,
well,
naming.
That's the hardest part of this thing, finding good names. Yeah, but that we'll figure out a nice word. I think refresh would be already good enough.
Okay.
Or just maybe because refresh it should actually apply to the options. So so we have options provider, and then maybe this should be called refresh options or something.
Yes.
So at the very least, we can know it's about the options being refreshed.
Like this. Okay. Okay, great. And it's something a little bit difficult because when we work on the server side and client side, we need to add some element in the elsa.api.client. Yes, this one. To allow the interface between client and server, and we then need to wait the publish the nugget to be able to implement this on the UI side. I have just changed the project. I have changed the version to be able to use it in the UI and test before releasing anything in the server side. But
that makes sense. What I do for local development is if you go to the Studio solution.
Yeah, a Studio solution, yes.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Oh, you're there? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then if you go to the framework folder a little bit higher.
Yes.
Yeah. And then open Elsa Studio Core, that project file in the editor. So notice on the commented lines, this is what I do. Yeah, I just reference the project directly during local development, and then I don't have to first build the Elsa API client. Okay. It's also easier for debugging in certain cases.
Because I just tried using a int file and changing my I changed my nugget, my DLL in the nugget folder. Okay.
That works. It's
it's a mess.
But I think this is it's more it's quicker, it's easier.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And also to that end, because your solution here, Elsa Studio, doesn't actually include this Elsa API client CS project file. For that reason, we have Elsa, the Studio Core solution, which does include this project file. So that's usually the one I work in.
Okay.
So before we move on to the next topic, if we have any, can you go back to your other solution 1 second? An additional thought with regards to the option and refreshability. Maybe what we could consider is to, if you look at the options provider class, I'm not sure, but I think it implements an interface. Probably it does. So either we can add a property to this interface because it doesn't make sense for anything else other than the property options resolver being invoked when the client selects, or when the user selects a activity in the designer, right? So maybe we can add a property here, or like a Boolean, or if you go to any implementation of this interface, we could use an attribute which is called auto refresh or something, because then the attribute is always applied to that class of that implements iProperty options resolver. So that's another way the developer can control whether they want it refreshed or not.
Yes, but if we have a property in the implementation, how the UI get this element?
Good question. So somewhere all of this information is collected, right? So there's maybe some API endpoint that is calling into the property options resolvers directly or indirectly, collecting the information and then building the model. So in that location, it could also inspect the active property options resolver being invoked to use reflection to see if it has this attribute assigned or applied. And if so, then it includes this information in the model being built that's going to be sent to the client. We can take a look if you want.
Yes, maybe, but okay.
So then let's start at Elsa the workflows.api in the workflows solution folder under modules. And then endpoints, give descriptor options. Yes, this one.
Yes, when we get the descriptor of the activity. That's right.
So here's getting the descriptor.
The
So this is
descriptor go to the registry.
yeah, exactly, and this is populated. So we need to look at the code that populates the registry.
It is,
yeah, so it's probably add or add many, one of those.
yes, create.
Oh, sorry, 1 second. Get or create descriptors. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, if you go into this one.
Type
yeah, that's a caching thing.
Yes, just a cache. I have seen something like this.
I think we actually need to look at the activity descriptors being built.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I think I changed something. No. I think it's called describe. Yes, describe activity. I think this one.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yes, this one. Okay.
All right. So there should be a get input properties.
And get input properties is.
Oh, this is just returning the get input the properties, but it's about describe. There's a there should be a function called describe input.
Yeah, describe input property. Passing describe input properties. No, let's get this one.
Yeah, this one. Describe, and then describe input property.
Here we go. Yes, it's here is the input descriptor. I need to modify.
Yes. Yeah. So exactly. And if we look at, you see the input options that is created on line 157. So here it uses options resolver get options async, and you can either update the options resolver probably. I don't know offhand, but that's something to look for, or directly here. But ideally in.
But this one is just when we get option. I think the input is this line. Huh? You say.
Yeah,
this
you
one?
see that.
Yes.
That's exactly
but
that.
This object is the result of the item available by the option provider.
Yeah, so then the options resolver, what is that thing? Can we look at its interface?
Yes, this option provider is a high property option provider.
So it's provided to resolver. And what is there one implementation of this one? Is it like a service or like a manager service?
Yes, or it's this one. It's a service.
Yeah, so there's one implementation.
Yeah.
And then it's gonna do okay, and then it's gonna inspect the input attribute and see if there's an options provider. Yeah. So this service probably you could update to see if there's also a well, 1 second. This returns the options thing directly.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's what I said. And it is used to initiate the options when we first load the workflow.
Yeah. Are you yeah, and there's of course some API that you implemented, the API endpoint that makes a call as well to get fresh options. Does it call into this service as well?
Yeah.
So so there's one option you could consider is instead of returning iDictionary string object, which you are about to refactor to just returning the value directly, it could also be like a new model, a new class that you have that includes the actual value, but also some metadata about this value or some preferences like, this flag auto refresh. I'm not saying this is what you should do right here, but I'm just exploring with you the option of how would you at which point would you read the attribute that you can attach to the options provider.
Okay. So I understand. So the idea here, for example, could be to change the model, the return model, add some metadata, for the first metadata will be refreshed, but maybe we can have other later. So it could be extensible. We need to get to send back the option items like we have here, so a custom object. And on the UI side, we can hook the metadata provider and not always refresh the call because it's mentioned in the metadata provider.
Exactly. Yes.
It's yes. I think it's a good idea.
Right. Then yeah. So that's good because then it's optimized and you introduce an option to potentially add more preferences configuration surrounding this if we ever need it.
And okay, and if we would it be useful to put in the metadata the information on how to serialize or deserialize the option item?
I don't think it's necessary. If anything, it might be a little bit arbitrary because there's also other places where the client side, already has it already understands what format it needs, right? So there's this shared JSON serializer configuration associated with the refit API client. So I would just go with that same format. Yeah.
Yes, the UI know how to interpret.
Yeah. Very good.
So if we add this option to the metadata, would this open a possibility, for example, to change or refresh the drop-down based on a checkbox? So one attribute is affecting when to refresh the drop-down, not just the cascading drop-down.
Yeah, that's a very good question because one of the pain points in Elsa 2 and currently also with Elsa 3 and specifically if you want some more complicated UI where you have multiple components. So as you mentioned, Ali, with the checkbox that then affects some maybe enabling or disabling some other component in that area. It's tricky to do right now because, well, you could do it if you implement a custom UI hint, but also the model that is stored as part of this input property would have to capture both these bits of information, right? It would have to have some sort of Boolean to represent the checkbox, and then maybe some value, some property to represent the selected value from the secondary, from the drop-down box, drop-down list. But it's not easy to just have one property, or you would have to have two properties. Yeah, that's the thing. You would either have to do this complex model that I just mentioned, so a class with those two properties, or you would have to expose to input properties on the activity itself. But that's more tricky because they would have to either point to the same UI hint, but then how would the UI hint understand which property is which? And it just doesn't. It's not very. It's not designed for that scenario at this moment.
Yeah, I understand. Maybe we can go with a simpler option. So for the refresh options, we could say either static or always, or when another property changes, like some solution in between.
Yeah, why not? But then how? Let's say you have this scenario where you want to enable or disable it, or show or hide a drop-down list when a checkbox is checked. In that case, this information that this checkbox is checked, you would have to store somewhere on the server as part of your activity settings or options. So I'm just thinking, where would you put that?
Yeah, makes sense.
But it's good to think about this scenario. It would be very, very good if we can solve this in a very elegant way for from the developer's perspective.
Yeah.
And I think we can do it. I think Jay can do it.
But just Mohamed, about the idea of when a property change or not, I don't know if we can know. Yes, we can know when a property change, but how to differentiate a value change and a re-render of the activity. I don't know. I'm not so strong in Blazor.
Not yet, anyways, but you're getting there.
We can try to look more in the life cycle events, and maybe there is a more specific event that we can pick, but we need to dig deeper on that one. I'm not sure as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not even sure I understand the issue you described. But so I probably misunderstand. But my initial reaction was that either an activity changed, a property of an activity changed its value or was changed, and that triggers an event, which is the case. But you're saying when it refreshes, how do you determine between a refresh and when something's selected? I don't see that as an issue or even a question, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit, Jay.
Yes, it's because I have seen, when you here, when you just resize, it's done a new rendering of the of this Windows, so it call a new time.
Yeah,
but it's not. Maybe it's not an issue because we don't do this every time.
Yeah, and if you do, then it refreshes the data if it was configured as such or programmed as such with the attribute or whatever is going to be added, and that should be fine. And if you think about, well, what Ali pointed out, what if you have the scenario where you want to toggle a checkbox and have that affect some other UI component?
Yes.
And of course, this is just a very specific example. It's not limited to tech checkboxes or checkboxes. It could also be anything arbitrary that somebody dreams up and they want to implement it, like maybe a change in a text field or a selected list, which is more commonly probably like the cascading scenarios. It could be anything, and those change events can be handled. And yeah, so two things. The first thing is finding a elegant way for developers to somehow set up their activity and their properties in a way that they can implement custom UI hint handlers that affect somehow both or multiple properties, whatever the case may be. So that's one. Two, and this could be a concrete implementation of this ability that I just described, where you implement cascading dropdowns. So using this mechanism, you can now have even using custom attributes that you annotate your input properties with on your activity, just to communicate to the system that there's this group of multi-selects, dropdowns that are cascading, and in this way we can have multiple ones, like checkboxes being checked that show or hide some other control, and this could all be exposed through attributes potentially, so that it's like a little set of Lego blocks that the developer can use to easily configure more advanced UI, more advanced than what we currently allow for in an easy manner.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
That would be really cool.
I think I will try to just draw a diagram of capability to allow us to talk about this.
That's a great idea. Yeah, it's much easier to reason about something that we can look at, other as opposed to just talking in the air like we are attempting to do now. So that's a good idea. Thank you.
Okay, for me, I think we discussed a lot on this point. I have no other specific topic.
All right, we should do this more often. I have so much more topics for you to think about. But let's start with this one. This will be a very, very helpful addition and change. Ali, did you have something you wanted to share or discuss?
Not at the moment. Maybe next time.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Then so it's been a full hour, but before we go, maybe just a quick glance at some of the recent commits. So let's see. I hope it's not too small. I forgot to resize my screen resolution, so apologies for that. This is the V3 brands, added support for single value headers. This is just a small thing. When you use the send HTTP request activity, you can also include outgoing HTTP request headers, but it was very strict in the format that it would allow you to provide it with, which is a JSON object of key value pairs, and the value always has to be an array of values, because that's how the target model is expected, expects the JSON value to be. But this makes it more flexible by also allowing to just provide a string value instead of an array of string values. So it's a custom JSON converter and nothing too exciting. Add support for direct output binding. And this might be a nice one to just show real quick before we hang up. Are you still okay, Ali? Because I know it's very late for you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, awesome. Then let me make it quick. All right, so for example, let's say we have this is just some workflow, and consider this as being a workflow that you want to execute as an activity from another workflow. So the only thing it does, it just sets some output to this workflow. So that's the purpose of the set output activity. And the way it works, you configure the output to update. So this workflow has a set of input output. So in this case, just an output called output1 of type string. And then using this activity, we are gonna supply the value for the output here. So that's the thing here. This existed for a long time, so there's nothing new here. But this is usable as an activity, so this is important that this one is checked. Now let's look at the activity or the workflow that uses it. So that's this one. So this activity is what we were just looking at. This is actually going to invoke the workflow that set the output, and that means that because it defined its output as output1, we can capture its output here through the output tab of this activity. And normally what you would have to do is create a variable and then assign the variable to the output. And that is the way to capture output from activities. But with this change, it also allows you to yet define another output of this parent workflow, basically, and then directly assign its output of this activity to this output here. And the name output1 is reused, but it doesn't have to be this name. We can, of course, use whatever we want, like output2. And then we assign it output2 like here. And the effect should be that if we invoke this through the REST API, through Postman. So I was looking at post execute, but this is get execute. And this is a fairly recent change which allows you to either do gets or posts. And this is useful if you want to execute a given workflow that returns a file, for example, using the file download or file response activity. You don't necessarily want to require the client to post a request. Maybe you just want to get some file and have support for file download resumption or things like that. So anyway, so here I'm gonna do send, and if we look at the output, we also now see the output included here. So before this commit that we were looking at, this will be empty because it didn't work direct binding of outputs, but now it works. So it makes it a little bit easier. Yeah, and other than that, I think there's just, of course, the things we looked at last week with the Python activity. I'm not sure if I demoed the Python activity, but I think we did look at the C# activity. Yeah. So Python is also an addition now. I'm not going to show it because my Python is I don't have much experience with Python, so I'm not gonna show it right now. Other than maybe to show that the activity exists here. So we have C#, JavaScript, and Python. And I think Ali, you asked if it supported some Python library. In the end, we figured out that that is not supported because this relies on Iron Python, and that doesn't support importing. At least what I could gather from a post on Stack Overflow from 7 years ago. Didn't do much research, but it seems to be that the better alternative for that kind of scenarios would be Python.net, which actually executes Python using the Python executable, which has, of course, all the support Python has, including the ability to import libraries, and that would make it much more powerful to integrate with Elsa Workflows.
Yeah, what I understood is that Iron Python is limited. It doesn't support Python libraries that are written in C. So that includes most of the machine learning libraries. But Python.net is actually executing Python in Python environment out of the process and then getting the output from there. But this will require more setup because you actually need to go and install Python, link the environment, and all of that stuff. So maybe we can give it as an option for the advanced scenarios, because I think the most interest in Python will be if someone is trying to integrate machine learning, making a chatbot or something like that, and they want to make it part of the workflow.
Definitely, yeah, that's a good idea. To make it optional, and maybe we can figure out whether it should be the same activity, but then configurable at the application level, and then it's transparent to the user whether they are running Python out of process or in process using Iron Python, of course, with the proper documentation or instructions from the maintainer of the application, or if it should be a separate activity. I don't like the latter option because then you would have run Iron Python and run native Python, which doesn't.
I understand, but it's like when you have a HTTP request and a HTTP request flow.
Yeah, I see your point because they both do the same things, but they are different constructs. And your point is that say similar for Python. There's just two flavors of them, and it's okay to have explicit have it made explicit that it's two different flavors. Yeah, there's a point to be made for that as well. Maybe we should think about that.
And I think it's about the out of process execution. We talked a little bit maybe last week or weeks before. It could be also useful to be able to execute something out of process. And for example, in a Kubernetes environment, you will have one container with the Elsa workflow and host. And when you need to execute to run Python.net, for example, this will execute a Python executable outside, so in another container, and we just need to create the link between using some sort of pub sub mechanism or with the actor model and it's what not proxy pattern, no, a sidecar.
Sidecar.
Sidecar pattern plus the actor model to be able to call a Python out of process in another environment. And with this, you will not have any issue about loading some specific library. You make the opt-in or opt-out in the configuration, but everything is executed outside the clean Elsa environment, which is only .NET.
Yeah, we should definitely add more primitives and activities and integration for those scenarios. But also because that is potentially very low level, and maybe on top of that we can build more higher level activities so that it's easy to use. Because run Python shouldn't have a dependency. It shouldn't require the user, to use Kubernetes and sidecars and containers like that. It should also the users, the application developers should be able to configure. Maybe they host on premise that doesn't use containers, and still they may want to be able to run Python.net.
Yes,
but I like your idea.
Yeah, but it's more for an enterprise pattern And that's because I work more on this kind of pattern.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like that. That's very powerful, and we should explore that further.
Okay.
So maybe next week, Jay, I will maybe have some nice updates. Yeah, but first, I think it's bedtime for some of us. All right, thank you so much. This was very informative and fun. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
We'll get
Bye, guys.
Bye.